So picture this. It's 1985 in West Germany,
Okay.
and you've got this massive 300-year-old oak tree sitting right next to a village church.
Sounds idyllic.
Right, until a huge storm rolls through and damages it. And the accepted, state-of-the-art rescue method at the time, to save a couple of cracked branches up in the canopy, they would drive a 15-ton steel truck directly over the tree's root system.
Which is just, I mean, it's biologically disastrous.
Completely. They were systematically suffocating the tree from the ground up just to, slap a Band-Aid on it. So welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're looking at the man who actually stopped those trucks. We're heading into the forests of the Westerwald region to unpack the life and work of Gary Blackburn.
Yeah, this is such a fascinating story.
It really is. He was this young Englishman who showed up with, well, basically nothing but a climbing harness, a chainsaw, and a radically different understanding of biology. And he somehow managed to completely revolutionize how an entire continent cares for its oldest, most precious trees.
It's a remarkable shift in perspective, really. Because for decades, the forestry and arboriculture industries, they operated on this very industrial, almost combative mindset.
Like man versus nature.
Exactly. If a tree presented a massive physical challenge, the assumption was just that you needed brute force, heavy machinery, massive scale to conquer it. But what we're exploring today is a paradigm shift away from that mechanical dominance.
Moving toward more of a partnership.
Right, a deep biological partnership with the tree itself.
And that partnership really starts by looking at the baseline, right? Like the sheer devastation of that 1985 standard practice.
The Hubsteiger.
Yes, the Hubsteiger, these massive 15-ton cherry pickers. Town councils would just roll tons of steel straight across the soft churchyard turf just so a guy could reach the canopy.
Which completely ignores the fundamental anatomy of a tree. I mean, the real powerhouse of that ancient oak, it doesn't sit up in the canopy.
It's all underground.
It lies completely underground. The fine root system extends way out, far beyond the drip line of the branches. And those roots, they rely entirely on the structural matrix of the soil.
Wait, structural matrix? You mean like the dirt?
Well, see, healthy soil isn't just dirt. It acts like a highly complex sponge. It's full of these things called macropores.
Okay.
They're basically these tiny structural pockets that hold moisture and, crucially, they allow for gas exchange. The roots actually need to pull oxygen from those microscopic pockets to survive.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that makes the cherry picker method completely illogical. That's like stepping on a deep-sea diver's air hose just so you can get a better angle to clean their goggles.
That is a perfect analogy.
Like you might fix the surface issue, but you're actively killing the patient.
That is exactly the mechanical reality of what was happening. Because when you drive a 15-ton Hubsteiger over that soft turf, you permanently compress that delicate soil matrix.
You crush the sponge.
You crush all those macropores, you effectively destroy the hydrostatic pressure balance, and you just squeeze all the oxygen pathways right out of the earth.
So the roots just suffocate.
They suffocate. And over the years following that so-called rescue, the root system dies off, decay sets in, and the tree eventually fails anyway.
That's so tragic.
But the real tragedy of the mid-'80s was that nobody in the mainstream knew any other way. It's like, how else do you reach a damaged branch 30 meters in the air without heavy machinery?
Right, which totally sets the stage for Gary Blackburn showing up in the Westerwald and just leaving the 15-ton trucks parked.
Exactly. He introduces the English double rope climbing technique to West Germany.
Which is wild because at the time, maybe, 4 or 5 people in the entire country had the skill to fluidly scale 30 meters into a canopy using just ropes?
It was incredibly rare.
But logically, and I was wondering this when looking at the sources, how does a human haul their own body weight, plus a heavy chainsaw, up into a tree without doing just as much damage to the bark? Like if I throw a thick nylon rope over a branch and just start hauling myself up, the friction is going to burn a trench right into the wood.
Oh, absolutely. And if you do that, you are destroying the tree's vascular system.
Just from the rope rubbing.
Yeah, because right beneath the rough outer bark is this incredibly thin, highly sensitive layer called the cambium.
The cambium?
Right. It's the living tissue responsible for producing new wood.
Right.
And it houses the phloem and xylem.
Which act like veins, right?
Exactly. They transport sugars and water up and down the trunk. So if you use a coarse rope and just grind it back and forth over a branch while hauling yourself up, you will tear right through the bark and sever that cambium layer.
So you basically cut off the nutrient supply to that entire section of the tree.
You do, which is why Gary brought a specific workaround for that friction.
Okay, what was it?
He utilized this highly specialized yet elegantly simple piece of gear called a friction saver.
A friction saver.
Yeah, it's essentially this soft protective sleeve equipped with smooth metal rings at both ends. Gary would ascend, install this sleeve over the anchor branch, and then his climbing rope would run exclusively through those smooth metal rings.
Oh, I get it. So the rope never actually touches the wood at all.
Exactly.
The metal rings handle all the movement and the heat from the friction, and that super sensitive cambium layer right beneath the bark remains completely untouched.
Untouched and totally isolated. The physical impact on the tree is reduced to almost zero.
That is brilliant.
Right. He wasn't conquering the tree from the outside with a diesel engine. He was utilizing the tree's own architecture to just navigate the canopy, leaving practically no trace of his presence on the bark.
And completely preserving that delicate soil matrix down below because there's no truck.
Exactly.
But, getting into the tree safely, that's really only half the battle. Because once he was 30 meters up in the canopy, Gary's actual philosophy on what to do with the diseased or damaged tree was completely at odds with the era.
It really was.
Because his life motto was improvise, adapt, overcome, and his primary goal was preservation. But the standard practice back then was often just to clear-cut a rotting natural monument. Right?
Yeah, which Gary viewed as a total ecological tragedy because a mature, massive tree provides these profound, often invisible ecosystem services.
What kind of services?
Well, just the sheer volume of water it moves creates an evapotranspiration effect. It significantly cools the surrounding air on hot days.
Oh, like natural air conditioning.
Exactly. Plus, it acts as an enormous aerodynamic filter, trapping airborne dust and pollutants.
Yeah.
And, it provides a complex, irreplaceable microhabitat for thousands of species of insects, fungi, and birds.
I have to ask, though, playing devil's advocate here. If a massive tree is visibly rotting near a village church or, like, a playground, trying to save it sounds like a massive liability.
Sure, people get worried.
Because a falling branch that size is deadly. Why not just cut the massive liability down and plant a new, much safer sapling in its place? Problem solved.
Well, because a sapling takes a century to provide even a fraction of those ecosystem services.
Ah, right. It's a time issue.
Exactly. The real challenge Gary took on was finding a way to make the ancient tree mechanically safe without removing it. He had to really understand the physics of the tree to relieve the structural stress.
Okay, so how did he do that while he was up there?
Relying on his experience, he would secure his main climbing rope to a sound central branch, and then he would strategically thin out the tree's crown.
I'm kind of stuck on the physics of that, actually. If he's thinning out the branches, he's removing the tree's physical weight, sure. But isn't he also removing the leaves it desperately needs to photosynthesize and, feed itself?
He is, and that's why it requires such a delicate, intuitive balance. Because the primary goal of thinning the crown isn't just weight reduction. It's really about aerodynamic drag.
Aerodynamic drag.
Yeah. Think of a tree's full, dense canopy of leaves like the sails on a massive ship.
Okay.
When a severe gale force storm hits, if a ship has all its sails fully deployed, the wind catches all of that enormous surface area. The pressure builds exponentially until
the mast just snaps under the load.
Exactly. So to save the mast, a sailor strikes the sails. By selectively removing specific branches in the crown, Gary is essentially striking the tree's sails.
Oh, wow. So he is opening up aerodynamic pathways.
Yes, precisely.
Instead of the storm winds slamming into the solid wall of foliage and transferring all that violent kinetic energy straight down into a weakened trunk, the wind just sweeps harmlessly through the gaps.
It just passes right through the thin branches, and the pressure on the rotting trunk is massively reduced.
That makes perfect mechanical sense. But what about branches that are already, structurally compromised or actively splitting? Back in the day, wouldn't they just bolt them together with heavy steel cables?
They would. That was a very traditional method. But rigidity in nature usually leads to catastrophic failure.
Because it can't bend.
Right. If you bolt branches together tightly with steel, they can't move. So Gary utilized flexible ropes to create what is called a dynamic web.
A dynamic web, like a safety net.
Sort of. He would connect vulnerable branches to stronger ones using materials that allowed for a calculated amount of sway.
So the branches can still move in the wind, but the dynamic web acts as a shock absorber, like catching them before they bend far enough to split.
That movement is actually the most critical part of the whole system.
Really? Why?
Because a tree is a living organism that responds to physical stimuli. If you lock a branch in place with rigid steel, The tree senses that it no longer needs to support that weight.
Oh, because the steel is doing the work.
Exactly. And so it stops building structural wood in that area. It gets lazy.
Right.
But by allowing the branch to sway naturally within a safe limit, the dynamic web constantly stimulates the tree to build up its own internal strength.
That is fascinating. It really makes you wonder, though, how the traditional forestry establishment reacted to this. This solitary climber relying on flexible ropes and aerodynamic intuition. At what point did the actual science catch up to his gut instincts?
Well, that convergence happened in a very high-profile way around 1987.
Oh, the Bond job.
Yes, Gary was working on a major job at the federal chancellery in Bonn, which, was the seat of the West German government at the time.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. He was suspended high up in the canopy, working on these incredibly thick, ancient trees right on the banks of the Rhine. And while he's up there, he meets a man on the ground who is studying the exact same trees, but through the lens of rigorous biomechanics.
Professor Klaus Mathek.
Professor Mathek. He was an absolute luminary in the field of tree physics. He was actively researching how trees structurally respond to wind and physical loads.
So he was basically mathematically modeling what Gary was just observing intuitively.
Exactly. Mathek's research proved that trees don't just endure stress passively. They undergo adaptive growth.
What does that mean exactly?
It means if a constant wind pushes against a tree from one direction over a long period, the tree will actively grow extra thick, dense reaction wood on the opposite side to brace itself against that specific load.
Wait, it's the exact same principle as lifting weights.
Yes.
Like you apply mechanical strain to a human muscle, and the body bulks up extra tissue in that specific area to handle the load better next time. The tree is constantly remodeling its own architecture based on the stress it feels.
It is exactly like that. And suddenly you have this incredible meeting of minds by the Rhine. You have Gary, the practitioner who intimately understands how the wood moves and reacts under his saw. And you have Professor Mathek, the scientist, with the formulas to prove the biology behind it.
What a duo.
Right. Gary absorbed Mathek's research, marrying his practical climbing acrobatics with this hard biomechanical science. And they formed a lifelong friendship that fundamentally elevated Gary's whole approach.
Which is an amazing validation, but it's one thing to have a brilliant scientist validate your methods in Bonn. It's an entirely different challenge to scale that methodology and, change the laws of an entire continent.
Huge undertaking.
Because by 1992, Gary is just 28 years old, and he travels to Brussels for the inaugural meeting of the European Arboricultural Council, the EAC. Because before this council, the standards across Europe were, frankly, terrifyingly unregulated.
The industry was essentially the Wild West back then.
Yeah.
Without uniform safety or biological standards, the methods being used by commercial tree climbers were actively destroying the canopies they were hired to maintain. And the most egregious example of this was the widespread use of climbing spikes.
I read about this in the sources. You mean like heavy iron spurs attached to their boots?
Yes. Workers would literally kick sharp metal spikes deep into the trunk, using them as temporary steps to systematically walk their way up the side of a tree.
But wait, if we just established earlier that the cambium layer right beneath the bark is the critical paper-thin vascular system of the tree driving iron spikes into the trunk, is systematically destroying that system with every single step.
Every single step.
You are puncturing holes straight through the tree's only armor.
It was biological vandalism. There's no other word for it. Bark evolved to keep pathogens out. So every time a climber kicked a spike into the trunk, they created a deep, open wound that completely bypassed those natural defenses.
Ugh, that's just a recipe for disease.
They were carving direct entry pathways for invasive fungi and aggressive decay. So, a worker might scale a tree to prune a dead branch, but by spiking their way up, they were condemning the main trunk to slowly rot from the inside out.
Having Gary in that room in Brussels must have been a massive shock to the system for the old guard.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because he had spent years utilizing those smooth metal friction savers just to protect a single millimeter of bark. And now he had the biomechanical backing of experts like Mathek to prove exactly why it mattered.
His presence there was vital. Gary wasn't just a theorist. He had a proven economically viable track record in the Westerwald, showing that a gentler, scientifically sound method actually worked in the real world.
So he helped write the rules.
He actively helped co-write the new, rigorous safety and care standards for the EAC. He translated his deep respect for the biology of the tree into binding European regulations. It effectively helped outlaw those destructive practices and brought arboriculture into the modern age.
That's an incredible legacy, but we've explored the soil mechanics, the aerodynamics, the policy changes in Brussels. If you strip all of that away, you kind of have to look at the underlying motivation.
Right.
Like, why does a young man dedicate his entire life to fighting for old wood? Why spend decades dangling from ropes, battling chainsaws, and arguing over regulations?
Beneath all the biomechanics, Gary's story is really driven by a profound, almost familial empathy for the trees themselves.
Yeah.
He viewed them not as timber and not as liabilities, but as these silent, enduring witnesses to history that just deserved care.
And our sources highlight a piece of text that I think captures this emotional core perfectly.
Hmm?
It's a poem written by a member of Gary's family, Robert Gordon Blackburn. It's titled The Old Oak Tree.
It's a beautiful piece.
It focuses on an ancient oak that stood for hundreds of years, and the imagery is incredibly grounded in, like, physical evidence. It notes a hidden hole deep in the bark where a lead bullet had embedded itself long ago, and it describes this massive split in the trunk from a violent historic storm.
But the poem emphasizes that despite the bullet and the fractured trunk, the tree lived on.
Yeah.
It continued to grow proud and tall. It provided a hiding place for children and a wide canopy for generations of family picnics. And the emotional weight of the poem really lands when the ancient tree is finally cut down.
Right. The felling isn't just described as a change in the landscaping. It says the loss of the tree leaves a hole in the sky where it used to stand.
A hole
In the sky. It's such a striking image. It captures the void left in an ecosystem and in a community when you lose something that massive. And the imagery of the bullet and the split trunk, it perfectly illustrates the physical reality of scars.
Absolutely.
These trees weather violent trauma, they carry the physical evidence of it in their trunks, and they just keep standing to offer shelter.
And, the biology behind those scars is fascinating
Yeah.
because trees do not heal,
Wait, they don't heal.
not the way we do.
Yeah.
When a human is cut, our cellular structure regenerates and replaces the damaged tissue. A tree cannot do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When a tree is injured by a storm or a saw, it relies on a process called compartmentalization.
Compartmentalization, okay.
It rapidly builds complex chemical and physical boundaries around the wound to permanently seal off the decay. So once the trauma is walled off internally, the tree simply generates new healthy wood out and over the top of the scar.
So it literally absorbs the trauma into his architecture and just keeps growing outward.
Exactly. It is a stunning display of biological resilience, and that is the exact resilience Gary recognized.
Mm.
When a town council just saw a rotting liability that needed to be filled, Gary saw an ancient survivor compartmentalizing its wounds, just needing some structural relief to keep standing.
And I think the most compelling part of Gary's story is that his dedication didn't just save those specific trees in the 1980s. He established a legacy that is actively managing that canopy today.
He really did.
He stayed in the Westerwald, fell in love with the deep forest there, and founded his own company, Westerwalder Baumdienst, which is now known as Baumdienst Siebengebirge. It evolved into this highly specialized family business.
A business that is now run by his 4 sons, Kevin, Alex, Luke, and William. They have completely taken up the mantle.
That's amazing.
They underwent rigorous arboricultural training across England and Germany, and they even attended specialized seminars run by the very same Professor Klaus Mathek that their father befriended on the banks of the Rhine all those years ago.
It's remarkable to think about the physical reality of that. You have Gary's sons utilizing Mathek's advanced biomechanical science, climbing high up into the exact same canopies their father manually saved decades earlier.
Yeah.
They are currently maintaining ancient beeches and oaks that were originally planted for their clients' grandparents. It's like this continuous, unbroken chain of stewardship happening 30 meters in the air.
It perfectly encapsulates the paradigm shift. I mean, we've gone from a solitary pioneer introducing a handful of ropes, to a local family business ensuring the biological survival of the canopy for the next century.
We started this deep dive looking at the destructive instinct to just conquer a problem with 15-ton excavators, crushing the soil and suffocating the roots just to reach a branch. And we've seen how one man's philosophy of improvising and adapting completely rewrote that approach, replacing the roar of heavy machinery with the quiet precision of a friction saver.
Because by understanding the aerodynamics of a canopy and the delicate biology of the cambium layer, he showed that partnering with nature is always more effective than fighting it.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, there's one thought I really want you to take with you. The next time you go for a walk at a park or just through your neighborhood and you spot a massive gnarled tree one with thick twisting bark and deep visible scars, pause and look closely at it.
Notice the details.
Yeah, look at how it compartmentalized its wounds. Ask yourself what historic howling storms it must have weathered to build up that reaction wood. And consider the invisible generational web of human care. The climbers working quietly 30 meters up in the branches. That might be the only reason that magnificent giant is still standing there for you to enjoy today.
It's a great reminder to look closer at the invisible biology sustaining the world around us. Keep questioning and stay curious.
We'll see you next time.